Hello, everyone. So while we kind of have people gearing up and getting on, I was going to go ahead and introduce our speaker and just kind of give a little bit of background. So welcome to the second webinar of the Central Virginia Regional Housing Partnership Winter Speaker Series. My name is Davie Sell, and I am the Regional Affordable Housing Vista here at the TJPDC. We appreciate you all spending this lunch break with us, especially considering that it's Valentine's Day, because what could be more romantic than zoning? Um, with the approved zoning changes that have gone on in Charlottesville, especially at the end of last year, zoning has been a hot topic of conversation. If you had the chance to join us for our last speakers on upzoning and affordable housing, then you know this is a topic that can inspire a lot of excitement, plenty of opinions, and a fair amount of passion, which again is very on theme for our Valentine's Day meeting. We're very lucky to be joined by Eric Mai, who is the co-executive director of Housing Forward Virginia, and he is going to give us some insights into the development of the Virginia Zoning Atlas and the implications of its use for local and regional planning. So from a regional perspective, especially here at the TJPDC, the Zoning Atlas really provides value given that we have such a breadth of land types across urban, suburban, rural spectrum, and just having a standardized resource to use and a language associated with that could add considerable clarity to the issue of zoning. So one housekeeping item on the end of that, we will have time for questions at the end of Eric's presentation. So please put any questions that you may have into the Q&A section of Zoom. And with that, the floor is yours, Eric.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my whole screen here. And hopefully everyone can see this. And so, yeah, I'm here to talk about the Virginia Zoning Atlas. This is a project that we launched last year. As Davey mentioned, I'm Eric Mai. My background is in urban and regional planning. I received my Master of Urban and Regional Planning from VCU, and I also have a Master in Archaeology and Heritage Management from the University of Leicester. Just a little bit about Housing for Virginia, if you don't know us already. We are an affordable housing nonprofit that does not build affordable housing, but instead we focus on the policy and research and data around affordable housing. We're a statewide organization that often works with local governments around their affordable housing issues. We have a diverse board that represents the major players in affordable housing here in Virginia, and that includes the heads of Virginia Housing and DHCD, as well as the Virginia Realtors, the home builders, and folks in local government and nonprofit sector as well. So why are we talking about zoning? Well, why aren't we talking about zoning? Zoning has become a lightning rod for discussions around the affordable housing crisis we continue to face across the nation and here in the Commonwealth. And, you know, our governor is talking about it as well as the president. And so housing continues to be one of these, really one of these necessary prerequisites to not just talking about affordable housing, but to creating affordable housing. And housing really continues to be one of the most important challenges facing localities. You can see it in the headlines right here in your region. Charlottesville home prices aren't following national trends is a funny headline to me, but you know, I think I'm someone who thought about moving to the region for the reasons that I'm sure many of you continue to live there. And so you see that, you know, housing continues to be an issue, you know, not just in urban areas of the region, but also in rural localities like Louisa, where folks are talking about mobile home parks. But, you know, there are, when it comes to zoning, we really see three key things that are standing in the way of making zoning work better for housing. One, people don't understand what zoning is or why it matters to them, or even how it functions. Two, people don't understand how zoning actually impacts housing affordability and housing supply and racial equity. And then 3, people, even if they do know those first 2 things, they don't know what to do to make zoning work better for them in their communities. And so last year, we launched our Zoned In initiative, which seeks to really break down what zoning is and what it isn't in plain language. And so for the uninitiated on the call today, zoning is one of the most powerful tools wielded by localities. It regulates and restricts what can and cannot be done to property within its borders. It can regulate how land and buildings can be used, what can be built, how what is built looks, and even where on that land it can be built. And so, as seen here, zoning can determine the look and feel of a community, creating what we see as urban or suburban and rural areas across the nation. And more importantly to us, and I think our organization, zoning can directly control the supply of housing, and with that, affordability. Zoning districts can dictate the type of housing that can be built and its form and size. So all of these things impact the supply on the ground and the value of land. Things like minimum lot size requirements that require acres of land to just build one type of housing, often single family detached, mean that the sale of that one house needs to cover the cost of that large amount of land plus the cost of construction. But oftentimes a new development may not conform to existing zoning, and the developer may need to ask for permission from local government to build something called the entitlement process. And so these efforts come with cost, and in some cases can cost as up to $1 million, as referenced here by this state commissioned report from 2020. And so as we take on our zoning education work and zoning atlas, we've been really emphasizing the importance of taking a regional approach. We already think about taking a regional approach when it comes to things like transportation and economic development, but why not housing? Housing markets don't respect jurisdictional boundaries. Housing also impacts all of these things that we plan for at a regional level, like transportation, the environment, and economic development. And failing to think about housing at a regional level can continue to exacerbate the inequities that already exist in housing, like actual racial segregation. So we really believe that tackling our zoning atlas on a region by region basis not only makes sense, but will help contribute to better regional planning. And so in doing so, we can better answer this question: how is the region zoning for housing? Not just our cities like Charlottesville, but the entire Charlottesville region. And also tackling this zoning atlas, we can also help community members better understand zoning and how it intersects with the issues that matter to them. I often kind of ask this question, do people in your community truly understand zoning? This is probably one of the most important powers wielded by localities, but do your residents understand it? Do your elected officials understand it? And not just what it is, but how it impacts all these other different intersections. And so just as a quick review that I did here, within the TJPDC region, there are 10 localities with zoning ordinances, and this includes the 4 incorporated towns. This chart shows when each zoning ordinance was last comprehensively rewritten, which is a major effort, but it's important to understand that while amendments help to respond to new issues, they are just generally responsive, addressing something that is really already occurring or a growing concern. Meanwhile, these comprehensive rewrites, like in Charlottesville, really seek to be more proactive and to look towards the future of growth and development in the community. So just to talk about what we did in Hampton Roads and our larger effort here. The Virginia Zoning Atlas is part of a larger effort to visualize how zoning across the nation is impacting housing development. Institutions and organizations across the nation are leading their own Atlas projects. Some are advocates, some are research institutions, and some are even state agencies, but all are part of this collaborative called the National Zoning Atlas. And so in joining this collaborative, we are following a really specific methodology to standardize the information in zoning ordinances. This allows for things like cross-jurisdictional comparisons, where it wasn't once so easy. It's not so easy to compare how Louisa zones compared to the city of Charlottesville or Fluvanna or Greene County. And so that way we can better understand not just how one locality is zoning, but the entire region, or even learn from our neighboring communities. And so using the methodology for Hampton Roads, we analyzed and mapped 19 local zoning ordinances. It took us 5 months, which is quite a lot because we were just kind of getting our feet wet in it. But this amounted to over 500 districts and overlays and over 5,000 pages read. And we also fixed hundreds of errors in local GIS data. Now, this didn't include some towns for which we couldn't access their zoning maps and ordinances because they existed at town hall, and we just couldn't get there, and we couldn't print those things out. So what did we actually learn from doing this work in Hampton Roads? What did we learn about Hampton Roads and how they zone for housing? Well, we learned that mixed use development, so where homes can be integrated with retail and other uses. This is a picture of Port Warwick in Newport News, which is actually a nationally recognized mixed use development. This type of development is only permitted by right, and so that's without a public hearing on only 3% of developable land. And so this is an important statistic when we're thinking about kind of growing trends in buyer preferences, in renter preferences. Not just millennials and Gen Zs want to live in vibrant, walkable, mixed-use communities, but also baby boomers who are seeking more active lifestyles where they can walk to the grocery store or walk to the doctor. And so that's an important implication, especially for Hampton Roads, which is losing a lot of its millennial population and is also aging pretty significantly. We also learned that 69% of land in the region is dedicated to detached single-family homes. Of course, that's maybe a little unsurprising, but especially when we think about single detached family housing as being not environmentally friendly. It's not sustainable, especially when you think about Hampton Roads and thinking about sea level rise. That type of development is not sustainable there. And so missing middle housing, duplexes, triplexes. This is the type of housing that's gotten a lot of attention in Arlington as of lately. These types of small scale apartments and home ownership opportunities that were really prevalent through the mid 20th century and early 20th century, and is often more affordable just by the sake of its size and type. This type of development is only allowed on 2% of land in the region. And so that in itself has major implications. And of course, larger apartment buildings, when we're thinking about 4 or more units, now they are allowed on 28% of land in the region, but these kind of extra conditional approvals are needed in nearly all cases. And so multifamily of this type is only allowed on 2% of land by right Hampton Roads. And so when we're thinking about the younger population who struggles and is challenged to reach home ownership, they need these multifamily opportunities, and not only them, but of course seniors as well, as they look to downsize, they look for smaller housing opportunities. And so we not only better understand how the region as a whole zones for housing, but we can now see how each locality zones for housing. This here shows the breakdown for single family detached, how much land each locality is dedicating to that type of housing. Unsurprisingly, many more rural localities are at the top of this list. But you also see more urban localities like the city of Hampton and Virginia Beach. 69% of land is dedicated to single family detached. Hampton, 67%. Here we're looking at that missing middle type of housing. Surprising to me, Newport News leads the top of this list here at 12%. But still, that's a small percentage compared to the vast amount of land. And then here, looking at where 4+ family housing is allowed by right, Norfolk, unsurprisingly, leads the region in allowing for the most types of multifamily. And so what does this all mean for Hampton Roads, though? Well, it helps further the discussion around zoning and housing affordability. So with more data, we can better think about what needs to be improved, or what impact changes can have on a community. Here, I think it's really important to think about the applications for this new type of data. Here, we're looking at the Rhode Island zoning atlas, where they did a much more detailed analysis at a parcel level. And so they were able to look at this area in the Hill and Harbor area of East Greenwich. And so they mapped their zoning, and then they actually looked at what is existing on each of these parcels. And so with this, they were able to make that comparison, that what's on the ground versus what could possibly be built. And so this helps in thinking about revitalization and redevelopment opportunities, especially these infill development. You think about this in small towns or more urban areas. This data also helps with transportation planning, supporting long-range transportation plan evaluations and opportunities for transit-oriented development. We can now more easily see where there are opportunities to upzone along public transit routes or where public transit is needed. Here we're looking at Hampton Roads and seeing, these are where all the bus stops are, and this is where 4+ family housing, typically where more low income and moderate income households live, and also looking at where transit routes are. We're thinking that obviously low income and moderate income households may take advantage of public transit more readily, and so where are there opportunities to really bring those two intersections together, housing and transportation? Here, and this is just a little quote here from a transportation planner in Hampton Roads, just talking about how they hope to use this data from the zoning atlas to support their work. Another really important piece here is thinking about economic development planning, and thinking about jobs. Here, we're looking at something called the jobs housing fit ratio. And so this is the imbalance between the number of low-wage workers and the number of homes affordable to those workers in that area. And so, for instance, here, a jobs housing fit ratio of 2 means that there's an equal number of workers in affordable housing units, assuming that there are 2 workers to a household. If there were a jobs housing fit ratio of 10, that means there are 10 low-income workers or 5 low-income households, assuming that there's 2 per household, that compete for every one home considered to be affordable to them. And so this map here shows where that ratio is above 2, and so where there's that imbalance. And so that means that there are multiple low-income workers that are competing for a low supply of affordable housing in those neighborhoods. And so when we're thinking about creating opportunities for housing that are close to jobs, that relates to zoning and relates to how we zone for housing and where we zone for housing and jobs, especially these kind of low income jobs. And finally, the zoning atlas is first and foremost a tool for engagement and education. The National Zoning Atlas and Virginia Zoning Atlas seek to simplify zoning so that anyone can better understand how it functions and what it means for housing as we continue to face this affordable housing crisis. Zoning ordinances and zoning maps aren't easy to translate. You have to go to your local government's website and pull up your zoning map. Then you have to pull up the zoning ordinance, and then you have to go back and forth cross-referencing these things. But the zoning atlas simplifies that. Here is a snapshot of our public-facing map on the National Zoning Atlas, where you can just ask the simple question of where can ADUs be built? Where can apartments be built? And then you can toggle these filters and see exactly where that is. And so what's next for us? What we're focusing on right now is continuing to refine our Virginia Zoning Atlas and its functionality. We plan to do a Northern Virginia launch in May 2024, along with the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, who has been a big supporter of the Atlas. And then we hope to complete Richmond and Petersburg before the end of this year. And so what we need to hear from folks like you is, do you want your region to be added to the Atlas next? And what important questions do you want answered? And how do you want to use the Atlas to advocate for more diverse housing or better plan for housing? And that is the end of my presentation, but I just wanted to actually show you the Atlas. Hopefully you can still see my screen here. And so I just wanted to showcase some of the functionality. This is the National Zoning Atlas's platform here, where you can see all the different atlases that have been completed across the nation. We here have focused on Hampton Roads first, but what this does is allow you to toggle here. I'm looking here in Virginia. And so I'll type in Virginia, and then I want to focus on a specific county, so Hampton. And so obviously it'll zoom there, it'll load. And then I want to ask it a specific question. And so where can I build apartments? And so the map will toggle, and you can see how the map changes, and you can see where you can build that type of housing. There are also advanced filters on here. And so if I wanted to focus specifically on where is 4+ family allowed, but where is it, let's see, this is where it's allowed entirely, but where is it allowed by right? You can see that changes. And so this is part of the National Zoning Atlas. We've created our own map as well. And the purpose for doing this is so that we have a little bit more fine-grained control over what our atlas looks like, what kind of information is included. That way we can include transit stops. We can include things like the 100-year floodplain, which was requested by a stakeholder in Hampton Roads. And so here you can see that I've added that. And maybe for our purposes here, you can see I want to know in Hampton Roads, where can I do 4+ family housing? The map changes, that's where I can do it. But where can I do it by right? And so without a public hearing. And so I'll toggle that, and you can see how that changes. Down here at the bottom of the sidebar, you can see a calculation. And so this tells me how much land, depending on what I'm looking at, allows for that type of housing. And so, for instance, I want to look at two family housing. Where is it allowed? Where is it allowed without a public hearing? In Hampton Roads. You can see how that changes. And then here is a calculation where it shows that it's 3%. And so again, feel free to explore this map. Think of ways that it can be improved, how you'd like to see it for the Charlottesville region. But that concludes my presentation, and I'll go back here.
So it looks like we have a few questions that have come in, and I can go ahead and read those to you, Eric.
Sure.
So the first one, what solutions are offered by changing what is allowed by right? How does this help address the affordable housing crisis?
Yeah, what allowing more diverse types of housing by right is one thing, and that's thinking about scale, right? And so that's introducing more supply. Right now, going through a rezoning process, going through an entitlement process takes time. You're looking at 6 to 12 months sometimes for a rezoning. And that is delaying the supply of housing that's needed. Creating more diverse types of housing also creates more diverse types of supply, more I guess I would say that different housing at different scales, right? And so if you're creating a zoning district that only allows for one type of housing, so single family detached, you're only creating so much housing that can be built at a certain time, right? Yeah, I guess I would ask you to kind of reframe that question too. That's a really broad question, and there's a lot of different implications. But I think in simple terms, you're unlocking supply, and housing affordability can be one piece of housing affordability is unlocking supply.
Thank you. I know that was a very broad question. Are you seeing any concerns about zoning changes causing people to leave the region? Or is migration away from a location something that we're seeing as a result of concerns about whether that be aesthetics or just the seeking of economic opportunity?
Yeah, that is an interesting question too. Yeah, I think that is a tough one to answer as well. I think that is dependent on a lot of different situations and conditions. I think often in these public hearings, a lot of people will shout and claim that they will leave if things are upzoned or changed in their community. But once that thing is built and they see what is there and that there's little impact to them, they often stay. I think about not just in terms of housing, but also kind of community development things. One example that I point to often is the Capitol Trail here, the Virginia Capitol Trail here in the Richmond region. That was building over 50-mile trail along people's front yards, and people were really upset about it. But once it was built, they love it. They love the trail. They use the trail, and so I think similar things can be said about density and new development.
Thank you. I think we're going to switch a little bit to rural, looking at what are the top challenges for rural communities? I would ask in zoning, and then also there's a question about attracting new workers, whether or not you can field that. But specifically rural communities and how the zoning atlas, does it add like clarity? Is there a particular difficulty with looking at the zoning of rural communities?
There is, and so the zoning atlas methodology, when you look at agricultural districts, which are primarily agricultural, but they do allow for housing, that shows up in the map as primarily residential, and I'll just show that. So, and so that does cause some concerns among folks that are looking to preserve, your rural character or thinking about conservation of rural land. It's slow here. So everything in purple here is primarily residential. And so this will just load back again. And so that nuance here, so you're looking at here in Southampton County, Isle of Wight, Surrey, these are really rural areas. And so it's showing up as primary residential. And so there's a lot of concern that this is saying, oh, well, you can build all types of housing here and do all types of development here. But that's not the case, of course. And so striking that balance between, preserving rural and allowing for certain types of development is really important. And I don't think that's something that can be necessarily captured by the zoning atlas, but that is a matter of creating and developing, smart zoning policy. I think about smart growth strategies, and so you're thinking about cluster development. So you're preserving lots of open space and then clustering small lots developments together, and so you're impacting the environment less. I hope that's a difficult question to answer, but I tried.
It seems like we only have those right now. Um, we've only got the difficult questions. How do we navigate concerns about lifestyle, whether people want to live in a high-rise apartment building or live in a location where they are common?
Oops. Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, no problem. So how do we navigate concerns about lifestyle? So whether people want to live in high-rise apartment buildings or whether they want to live in a location where they are common at all?
Yeah, I think that is obviously striking a balance again, is creating diverse options for the people that you want in your community or want to live in your community. And so allowing for I don't think high rises are common in the Charlottesville region, right? So allowing for denser options in more urban dense areas, and then kind of there's a urban planning thing, I forgot what it's called. It's the spectrum, right? The urban rural kind of spectrum, and so everything in between that is accounted for too. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think we're bouncing a little bit back to rural. Is there any effort to address how much farming land is basically preserved in the housing forward process? You guys aren't necessarily determining the zoning, so I'm not sure how specific that'll be, but when it comes to that rural locality, I know you mentioned the way it looks is very particular. Is there any consideration in the zoning 101 of like how important that agricultural zoning is to the community?
The short answer is no. I think that is not a consideration for the National Zoning Atlas project. I think preservation of rural and agricultural land is what we're presenting is what's given to us. And so what we're presenting is the zoning ordinances created by each locality. And so all we are doing is interpreting that through the methodology and then presenting that. We aren't giving it any particular value read, if that makes sense, or saying that this type of zoning district is created for this purpose, for instance, for the preservation of agricultural land.
Sort of at the regional scope, what did the regional collaboration look like when you guys were developing the Hampton Roads piece? Who were the partners that you felt assisted you and your team the most?
Sure. And so we had a lot of support from the Hampton Roads PDC. And then we also assembled a work group of a lot of different stakeholders in the region, those that were interested in zoning reform and specifically around pushing for zoning reform in the region. I think the topic of zoning reform in Hampton Roads is still pretty nascent. And so getting support for zoning at the regional level is also difficult for that reason, but also I think there's different levels of collaboration in that region as well. And so we had nonprofits on board, we had developers, folks in local government, all kind of lending their feedback and advice on, what should we focus on? And so you'll see if you look at their findings or our research for the Hampton Roads Zoning Atlas, we really focused in on economic development and transportation. And so that's why we mapped transportation. That's why we did the jobs housing fit ratio. Those are two big topics of conversation in the Hampton Roads region. And we did that because of the advice of that work group.
Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate it. I think that is the end of our questions. We're done throwing the hardballs at you.
Okay.
So thank you for all of those questions, for all who participated. And thank you, of course, to our speaker, Eric Mai, for taking the time to discuss those with us and decode them as best we could. And also explain the clarity that this atlas can bring to an issue that is clearly as complicated as zoning, especially across regional lines. So I'm eager to see what the other sections that you guys are currently working on will look like and what other insights you guys are able to gain. So if anyone has any interest in working on the zoning atlas or any further questions for Eric, I know he flashed his email up on the screen, but I will also be sending that out in our follow-up email to this webinar. And I thank you again, Eric. And I hope you and all of our participants are going to have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.